Hi guys, Steph here from GameReviewHQ.net, and today we will be giving our first look at the online game Journey to the West. But before we get into details, here's a quick background of the game. Journey to the West is a free-to-play fantasy MMORPG based on the epic Chinese novel of the same name, published in the 16th century during the Ming Dynasty. The game was developed by Xiaoyu Information Tech Company and is published by QBZone. So if you have read or at least are familiar with the Chinese novel, then you would surely appreciate the gameplay and the characters in the game. Now, let's go on and talk more about the specifics on the game. Let's start with graphics and animation. The graphics of this game won't blow your mind. Perhaps one could say that it is average looking. Maybe it would take your breath away if this was released and if you were, playing around the year 2004 perhaps? What I'm saying is that there are tons of other MMOs out there that have the same quality of graphics, some even better, but bank on amazing gameplay and or story. I'm thinking Perfect World, Age of Wushu to name a few. Anyway, more on that later. The game's animation is pretty simple. Yes, it may have some flashy or explosive moves, but you would get tired of those flashy moves if they lacked weight. What I mean is, for example, you do a fancy ground shattering move, but then this flashy move will just deliver 1/8 worth of damage to your opponent's HP. One may argue that it may be a case of you being just a newbie, but I have seen other players at max level and still showing the same thing. Personally, I think the flashy moves should carry weight more when it comes to damage. Also, some cutscenes are odd. For example, for the very first cutscene where you will find Son Goku screaming at the Jade Emperor to come out, you would think that the Jade Emperor is in front of him, but then you would find that the animation shows the Jade Emperor behind him and not in front of him. It seems that Son Goku is screaming in the wrong direction, or maybe screaming at nobody. Later on, you may also find Son Goku leaping towards the wrong direction again. Now on to the language. I think the translation is definitely one of the bad things here, since most translations are awkwardly done while some seem to make no sense at all, as if the text were just translated using Google Translate. There are some good things to the game too, like the sound. It is quite catchy in my opinion, especially the one in the login screen and the one that plays during cutscenes. I just hope they could have made longer versions of the background music though. If I would describe it, it would seem like a mixture of old traditional music with a new spin on it. One more interesting thing in this game is the detail on some characters. Their equipment is so fancy and flashy. I actually think the person who did the concept art of the game was really into it. In general, the colors used in the game are quite lovely and fun to look at too. But alas, they weren't enough to really carry the game to greater heights. When it comes to graphics, I'm quite curious as to what more could be seen from the game if you get to endgame territory. Now, let's talk about character creation or customization. The game has 4 classes available for the gamer. 2 of these 4 classes, however, are gender locked. The Azure class is your basic tank warrior brute class that usually holds aggro of enemies and dishes out considerable damage. This character is gender locked as a male. The Kitsune, odd that it's called Kitsune because it's a Chinese themed MMO with a Japanese character. In Japanese, Kitsune is fox. Anyway, the Kitsune is your basic crowd control character that focuses on debilitating statuses and delivering limited damage. This Kitsune is also gender locked as a female. Next is Netherese. It is your basic DPS or damage per second class that hits fast and dodges well. Then there is the Naga, the magic wielding class, probably the most popular class in any game because of being seemingly overpowering compared to other classes. The customization itself is basic, as well as it only consists of a few face styles, hairstyles, hair colors, skin tone, and a unique design that goes with each class. For example, the Azure has different styles of tattoos for a fixed location on his left chest area. The Kitsune has different ear types. The Netherese is a weird one actually. I don't know if it's a glove or if it's his or her arm that changes with the style. And the Naga has different head ornaments that appear to be fins or head wings. None of these affect gameplay in any way. Well, of course, you can nominate your own name for the character too. Now for the story. I don't know much about this particular Chinese story, but from what I can tell, since there have been several adaptations of the story in books, movies, etc., I believe the story is interesting. But if you would try to base it on the game, I just can't feel it. It doesn't grab my interest much. This game also adopts a chosen one angle in the story wherein the player is led to believe that he or she is their only hope. I just find it a bit weird when you see a lot of other chosen ones around you. Again, I think the story doesn't give much hold or doesn't provide much intrigue to keep the players interested and curious enough until the end. Now more on leveling. Your character levels up as you would expect by doing quests, killing enemies, completing instant dungeons, etc, etc. There really isn't nothing of note to be done here that other MMOs haven't done better. The quests are generic MMO quests. There are kill quests in which you will kill a specified number of enemies, fetch quests where an NPC commands you to be his or her errand boy and get some stuff, NPC talk quests where you would just literally talk to an NPC, and a combination of fetch and kill quests where you kill an enemy to collect an item from it. These quests are really boring to do. For example, some quests may let you kill 2 enemies at the beginning of the game, and then later on these kill quests would demand that you kill 70 plus enemies that it sometimes feels like a chore. This system has been in place for the longest time, so I think being a game released in 2014, a new type of quest would have been implemented. Also, when you level up, your character automatically gains stats, meaning you can't manually pick the stats you want to level up and customize your build. Well, you can do some customization with the equipment you gather throughout the game though. The maximum level at this time is actually level 50, and during my first look, I reached level 20 in about 3 hours. I think that time can even be shortened if you didn't care to read the text or you didn't explore much like I did. But like most games, the difficulty curve will surely be noticed when you reach mid-game. You can grind all day if you want, but there is another feature in this game that you may notice is bad or good, depending on your stance in the matter. It's the game's auto-botting feature. More on that later, I guess. Now for the gameplay. Gameplay, most of the time, this is what makes or breaks any game. Yes, a developer can focus on good graphics, but players will still cease to play if the gameplay doesn't interest them. The gameplay in this game uses generic cookie-cutter mechanics with a Chinese theme slapped on it. More specifically, it's basically the Journey to the West story. Aside from the models, there is nothing of note that expresses the franchise's own unique feel. It could be said that almost all Chinese-themed fantasy MMOs are the same, but I'm pretty sure that since this is based on a notable Chinese novel, they could have applied a more unique approach or flavor to the story and made it more unique. It's sad that you can't even play as any of the main characters in the story. You see them as NPCs, but you don't do anything of note that affects the world. The classes are generic too, in that they are just called something different, but basically, they follow the common classes in other games and perform default abilities or roles with no new twist or unique appeal. The skills are also pretty bland, and like I said earlier, the flashy animations can only get you so far, and you will get tired of seeing that skill over and over again. It's just another skill rotation game. What I mean when I say skill rotation is just that when you use a skill and use another skill because the skill you previously used is in cooldown. No application of tactics I see whatsoever. There's the occasional heal skill or AoE skill, but you don't do anything remotely resembling strategy or tactics too. You just spam everything while your resource builds up. Then you recharge it in any way you can and resume spamming. No dodging, I mean real dodging in which you can actively evade. No blocks, no weak points, etc. It's simply lackluster. It's so basic that you can even macro it. And speaking of macro, I mentioned botting a while ago. There was a time when botting was considered illegal. Some people do even to this day. Some games even ban macros, but here in this game, botting is a feature. Yes, that's right. I believe when a game gives you the choice to bot, it's basically the game telling you something along the lines of, hey, we know our game's boring and unnecessarily hard to stimulate challenge. Basically, we got lazy here and you can be lazy as well, so bot away. When a game doesn't trust in its own mechanics that it offers you to literally skip gameplay by botting, I think that's bad news for me. For the community, you can chat with other players with the use of the chat box, but good luck with that, because the community is about as default as it can get. Default in the online community, I mean you could have some rude, spammy, those kinds of people. You know, the type of people that usually lurks around YouTube and other social media comment section. When you type a message, more often than not, your message would probably fall on deaf ears, since your message will soon be buried under tons of gold sellers spamming the chat and other players using megaphones or speakers to get attention. Some even make their text size huge to make their messages more noticeable. During my time here, not a single one of my questions were answered. It could be that I was just extremely unlucky when I asked, but it could also be because the chat box was filled with players arguing and berating each other. Now for microtransactions. A quick look at the item mall or shop shows the game's pay-to-win aspect clearly. Of course, those that spend will have an edge over others. Currently, they come in the form of items that aid in upgrading equipment. If you don't pay up, you will have broken equipment right and left. So my advice is spend on this game only if you really like this game. So let's do a recap of all that we've talked about. For the pros, the game has a good soundtrack as it mixes old and modern music in a very good way. It also has good aesthetics and theme. Since there were no other online games that rode on this particular mythology, they had the chance to put the story to life. And by looking at the way the graphics were used, I think they were able to do so to some degree. It has some good models for most of the characters. I have seen a lot of detail worked onto the armor, weapons, and features of the characters. Some of the areas look cool too, a rich, colorful world in general. Oh, and they have Master Oogway. Now for the cons. The story doesn't grip you as it should since it has a strong story as its inspiration. Also, at this time and age, I don't think we need another Chosen One scenario in a game where you really aren't the Chosen One, in my opinion. Gameplay is too generic. You can literally reskin the whole game and no one would know the difference with other generic MMOs out there. Being a quest-based MMO, you mainly level up by doing quests, but they are so generic and boring that you have to drag yourself around to do them. Slow leveling and damage spawn for enemies really make it a chore to even fight. That is probably why the next con was suggested. Botting. This game encourages botting. The game itself doesn't trust in its gameplay mechanics that it lets you bot to get stronger. For me, I would wonder why play the game then if you won't play it, right? Heavy pay-to-win aspect. Expect to be thrashed around by heavy spenders with no skill but fat wallet. Incredibly poor translation. Rather than just read what is stated, it forces you to actually analyze what the translated text really means. Shoddy community. If the people are not wasting their money or inflating their ego in some way, or saying nonsense things with megaphone speakers which are paid for with real money by the way, they would be arguing with players most of the time. In conclusion, Journey to the West is a very generic MMORPG. Given that it was released in 2014, the game could have done more in my opinion. Although it has some pros, the cons heavily outweigh it as it misses the good chance of getting the newer generation to get familiar with this famous and interesting Chinese mythology. If you really like the Eastern Oriental aesthetic, there are lots of others out there that could do the things better. Perfect World, for example, is a long-running Chinese-themed MMO that came out a long time ago and does exactly what this game does, and even better. So that's it for my first look at the game Journey to the West. Once again, this is Steph from GameReviewHQ.net. Thanks for listening and see you next time.